Right now, across America and Canada, millions of people are experiencing the same strange feeling. You're working, you're earning money, but somehow you're getting poorer. Groceries cost more, rent exploded, and your paycheck disappears faster than ever. So what actually happened to the North American economy? That's exactly what this video is about. And by the end of it, you're going to understand clearly, completely, why this is happening, who is responsible, and what it means for your future. Let's start with the facts, because the facts are staggering. Over the past 4 years, the average American household has lost over $12,000 in purchasing power. That's not because they spent more. That's because their money, the same money, buys dramatically less than it did before. In Canada, it's even worse. The average Canadian now spends more than 60% of their take-home pay on housing alone. 60%. That's not a housing market. That's a hostage situation. Eggs are up over 40%. Butter, bread, cooking oil, all up between 20 and 50%, depending on where you live. And rent? In cities like Toronto, Vancouver, New York, and Los Angeles, average rents have more than doubled in less than a decade. But here's what makes this so maddening. Wages haven't kept up. Not even close. The average worker in North America earns maybe 3 to 4% more than they did 4 years ago. Inflation has eaten that raise, and then some. You are working harder, earning more on paper, and living worse in reality. That is not a glitch in the system. That is the system working exactly as designed for someone, just not for you. To understand why everything is so expensive, you have to go back to March 2020. When the pandemic hit, governments panicked. And honestly, some of it was necessary. Businesses were shutting down. People were losing jobs overnight. So the United States and Canada did something extraordinary. They printed money. Trillions of dollars injected directly into the economy. In the US alone, the Federal Reserve expanded its balance sheet by nearly $5 trillion in under 2 years. Canada followed a similar path. Now, here's the thing about printing money. It's like adding water to orange juice. At first, everything seems fine. But eventually, the juice gets thin. There's less flavor, less nutrition, less value. That's what happened to your dollar. All that new money chasing the same amount of goods created the perfect storm for inflation. And then, just to make it worse, the supply chains broke. Factories in Asia shut down. Ships sat idle at ports for weeks. Trucks had no drivers. And suddenly, there wasn't just more money. There was also less stuff to buy. Prices went in only one direction. But let's talk about something that almost never gets discussed in mainstream media. The role of the central banks themselves. The Federal Reserve in the United States and the Bank of Canada. These are the institutions responsible for managing the money supply and keeping inflation under control. That is literally their job. And for years leading up to 2020, they kept interest rates near zero, almost free money, for over a decade. That cheap money flooded into real estate, into stocks, into assets, making the rich richer while ordinary people saw their savings earn almost nothing. When the pandemic hit and trillions more were printed, inflation didn't just happen by accident. It was the predictable result of years of monetary policy that prioritized financial markets over working people. The people who were supposed to protect your purchasing power. They failed you. And then, when inflation exploded, they responded by raising interest rates so aggressively that they crushed the housing market, made debt unbearable, and slowed the very economic growth that could have helped wages catch up. It's worth asking, who exactly are these institutions serving? Now, here's the part of the story that often gets left out. Yes, supply chains broke. Yes, money was printed. But here's a question nobody in power wants you to ask. If inflation was caused by supply problems and money supply, why did corporate profits reach record highs during the same period? In 2022, the top 500 companies in America posted their highest profits in history. Grocery chains, oil companies, insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, all of them reported record earnings while you were rationing your groceries. There's a term economists are now using for this. They call it greedflation. The idea is simple. Companies use the cover of inflation to raise their prices far beyond what their actual costs justified. They blamed supply chains. They blamed wages. They blamed everything, except their own margin expansion. A major North American grocery chain saw its profits increase by nearly 50% in a single year, while publicly blaming suppliers for rising costs. Meanwhile, their CEO pocketed a compensation package worth over $14 million. This isn't capitalism working correctly. This is a system where competition has collapsed, where a handful of companies control your food, your fuel, your phone bill, and your rent, and they know you have nowhere else to go. Nothing captures the affordability crisis better than housing, and nowhere is the failure more complete. In Canada, housing prices increased by over 50% between 2020 and 2024. In some markets like Toronto and Vancouver, a basic detached home now costs over $1 million. $1 million for a house for a normal person? The math simply doesn't work. In the United States, mortgage rates climbed to levels not seen in over 2 decades. Suddenly, the monthly payment on a median-priced home went from around $1,200 to over $2,500, almost overnight. And here's the brutal irony: our rent went up too. So whether you wanted to buy or you had no choice but to rent, you lost. The only people who won were the ones who already owned multiple properties, the investors, the funds, the corporations that bought up single-family homes by the thousands during the pandemic and turned them into rental income. By 2024, institutional investors owned more than 5% of all single-family homes in the United States. That might sound small, but in key markets, that number is closer to 20 or 30%. That's not a housing market, that's a portfolio. So, what did governments do about all this? They raised interest rates aggressively. The logic was simple. If money is more expensive to borrow, people borrow less, spend less, prices fall. That's the textbook solution. But here's what the textbook doesn't fully account for. Raising interest rates doesn't hurt corporations nearly as much as it hurts ordinary people. A massive company can absorb higher borrowing costs. A family trying to buy their first home or a small business owner trying to survive, they cannot. So while the Federal Reserve and the Bank of Canada raised rates to fight inflation, they also made mortgages more expensive, made car loans more punishing, made credit card debt more crushing. The inflation hurt you, and then the cure hurt you again. And food prices, they barely moved, because food companies locked in their new higher prices and kept them. The rate hikes did almost nothing to bring grocery bills back down. And then there's the one nobody talks about enough: shrinkflation. You've noticed it, even if you didn't have a name for it. The bag of chips that used to weigh 400 grams now weighs 320. The juice bottle that used to be 1 liter is now 900 milliliters. The toilet paper roll that used to have 300 sheets now has 240. Same packaging, same price, less product. And because the change happens gradually, across hundreds of products, your brain doesn't fully register the theft, but your wallet does. Studies suggest that when you factor in shrinkflation alongside traditional price increases, the real cost of everyday goods is 20 to 30% higher than official inflation numbers suggest. You are being systematically deceived, not just by rising prices, but by falling quantities disguised as the same product. Here's the uncomfortable truth: this didn't happen in a vacuum. Politicians on both sides of the border, both parties, both countries, contributed to this crisis. And the generational gap tells the story better than any statistic. In 1985, a single income, a factory worker, a teacher, a postal employee, could buy a house, raise a family, and still have something left over at the end of the month. In 2026, 2 incomes struggle to pay rent. 2 incomes. And still, there's nothing left. Your grandparents didn't have more discipline. They didn't work harder than you. They just entered a system that was actually designed for them to succeed. The system you inherited was redesigned, quietly, gradually, to extract wealth upward, not distribute it outward. Decades of deregulation allowed industries to consolidate until 4 companies control your chicken, 3 companies control your cereal, and 2 companies control most of your phone options. Competition died quietly in boardrooms, with the approval of regulators who looked the other way. Housing zoning laws, often protected by homeowners who benefit from rising property values, blocked new construction for decades in the cities where people most needed to live. The shortage was manufactured. The crisis was predictable, and the warnings were ignored. Meanwhile, the tax code in both countries continues to reward asset ownership over labor. The more properties you own, the more you benefit. The more you earn by working, the more you are taxed. The system is not broken. It is functioning perfectly for the people who wrote it. So where does this leave us in March 2026? Inflation has technically cooled from its peaks. The headlines say the crisis is over. But if you're standing in a grocery store looking at your total, you know that is not the full story. Prices did not come back down. They just stopped rising as fast. The new normal is simply more expensive than the old normal. And there is no political plan in either country to reverse that. The housing crisis is deepening. The wealth gap is widening. A generation of young people in both America and Canada have quietly accepted that homeownership is not for them. Not because they failed, but because the math was rigged before they ever started. And yet, people are waking up. Voters are demanding accountability. New housing policies are being tested. Antitrust enforcement is starting slowly to show teeth. The conversation about corporate pricing power is finally entering mainstream politics. Change is slow, but the awareness is growing, and awareness is always the first step. If you've made it this far, here's what I want you to take away from this video. You are not failing. The system is not meeting you where it should. The feeling that something is wrong, that you should be further ahead by now, that your parents' life seemed more achievable, that the numbers simply don't add up. That feeling is not weakness. It is accurate. Understanding why things are expensive is the first step toward demanding something better. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because the most dangerous thing the powerful can count on is that you'll just assume it's your fault. It isn't. So let me ask you something. Where do you live? The US or Canada? And how much has your grocery bill changed in the last 2 years? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one.